Hello and welcome to Rennock, or should I say Rennock Mk2. You will have seen, if you go back on this channel, a video I did a while ago describing the building of Rennock Mk1, which was the first iteration of this layout, a small suburban layout based in South Glasgow. It was on the exhibition circuit very briefly. It did 2 shows last year, and it was only exhibited as an analogue layout. And following an exhibition in April of last year, I made the switch to DCC. There are also a number of changes that I wanted to make to Rennock, a number of upgrades, and the decision was made to actually rebuild the layout from scratch. So there are a number of upgrades and improvements that this has over the previous iteration of the layout. We'll go through some of them. Obviously put a fair few videos on this channel now showing the trains in action, but I haven't really described any of the building or any of the theory behind the layout. So the kind of premise of the layout is that it's an end of a station. So I thought about modelling a depot, but I thought that's got limited operational interest because you can't have passenger services, etc. And I thought about modelling a small terminus in the space available, but I thought that would feel quite squashed, and that's also limiting because then you wouldn't have much space for other loco moves. You wouldn't be able to fit in a runaround loop. It would be a very compact kind of urban station. So what I sort of did is effectively sort of modelled quite literally in between the two. So what I've got here is what you'd probably describe as a station throat between a station and an off-scene depot. I'll come on to that later because that depot is actually now planned to be built as an extension board. But we've got, what we're doing here is simulating terminating loco hauled services, but only modelling the beginning of the train as it emerges from under the last bridge. So we get to sort of pretend or fake longer services. I only need 1 or 2 coaches per train. And then the engines are very much the feature, so the kind of focal point of the layout is the crossovers and the locos running around and going to the depot, etc. So there's a number of key improvements made to the layout over the previous one. The main ones are the track being upgraded. So previously we've always used Pico flat bottom track, and we're now using the Pico bullhead range, which is as easy to work with as the flat bottom track now. The other difference is the wiring is sort of rationalised, simplified, because it's built for DCC operation from the outset, so there are no section switches. In fact, there are only 3 switches on this layout, 1 for each of the crossovers, controlling the 6 motors. So it's the smallest control panel I've ever had. It's the most simple in that respect. It's also 10 centimetres deeper than the previous layout, which has given us a little bit more space at the front, so the front track isn't actually as close to the edge of the board as it was on version 1 of the layout. We've got a bit of depth at the back, which has allowed us to increase from 3 tracks in from the fill yard to 4 tracks coming in from the fill yard, and from 2 platform faces up to 3 platform faces. So we've got a bit more scope for passenger trains, and overall the layout feels a little bit less squashed than it did previously. The fill yard is the same as the previous iteration of the layout. So why don't we start by having a look at the fill yard. So we're now looking at the Rennock fill yard. The fill yard is 6 roads feeding the 4 lines in, with centre roads here that can feed 2 positions, and in the centre a crossover to allow the runaround of loco hauled trains. The track used in the fill yard is Pico Co 100, and we're using Streamline Electrofrog for the points, and we're using the set track range mainly for the plane track. And the advantage of this is it helps keep the line as straight as possible. Obviously with Streamline track it allows you to bend to an infinite number of different curves, but the advantage we want in the fill yard is the ability to use loco lifts if we want as well, so that we've got the use of set track makes sure the tracks are dead straight. This was modified between Rennock Mk1 and Rennock Mk2 to add in additional siding at the back. The switch panel that there was at the back when it was the analog version layout was removed, and all the lines were wired up directly. A few modifications were made, some sidings were taken out, and extra insulators and feeds were put in to make sure all the lines were live at all times, so it's fully DCC compatible. And that's it, and it's quite a busy place when you're running at shows, because we've got to kind of keep quite a quick procession of moves happening. We've got lots of short moves happening in quick succession to keep the public interested. So the interesting thing is this fiddler yard is as long, if not arguably longer, than the scenic section. Once you factor in the back scenes and the bridges, the scenic length is substantially under 130 centimeters, and the fiddler yard board is 130 centimeters long. But it feels necessary when operating the layout to actually have that much space just to accommodate that many different trains that need dispatching to the main board. Here is the Rennock switch panel, which consists of just 3 switches. So what we've got is 6 points, each with slow action cobalt IP analog motors, complete with frog polarity switching, and they're wired up in pairs so that each set of crossovers can be changed by 1 switch. So it's one of the more simple layouts to operate. The other thing on this layout is that we do have signals, but because the theory of this layout is that the line has been lifted beyond the bridge to the right, that those signals would never clear from red. You would only use shunt signals to make the loco moves. So we've got some non-working dummy plastic ground signals positioned over the layout. And what that means is we actually have no signals to operate per se. So the operation of this layout is very simple. There's no section switches like you get with analog. There's no signals to clear. It's just driving the trains and changing the points. The DCC system being used is the NCE power cab. I actually have 2 handsets now. We didn't for the first show that we did, and the second handset isn't here at the moment. But it's a very flexible system. The handset here actually contains the command station as well, so all the processing is done in here. There's no additional computer external to the handset. And when we use the second handset, we have a second power cab that plugs in using the curly coiled cable provided, and that converts the power cab into Pro Cab mode, which means it's a secondary controller and is communicating with the main controller here. That allows fully flexible operation of 2 locos by 2 different operators anywhere on the layout. So that's been very useful. NCE power cab I chose because it seemed to be the most widely used one. I was going around shows looking at what systems people were using, and it seemed to be by far the most common. So we've ended up with that, and I'm very pleased with it so far. And the PCP panel is just on this piece of wood here that allows it to be bolted to either the front of the layout for home operation or to the rear of the layout when we go to shows, so that's all flexible. And it's worked very well for us so far. One of the things I mentioned that's another upgrade that was done on the layout was the improvement made to the track. So we've ditched using the Pico Co 75 flat bottom range, and we're now using the bullhead system complete with their unifrog points. Now the advantage of the unifrog points that we didn't really understand until we started working with them is that the frogs themselves are very, very small, and they are isolated within the point piece. And what this means is there is no requirement to put insulated joints on the inside rails beyond the frog like you would with the electrofrog system. This means there are no insulated connections anywhere on the scenic board. Everything is entirely one section. All rear rails are connected to all other rear rails on the layout, and the same for the front rails. That means that the slogan used for DCC of just 2 wires is kind of true here. This layout could work with just 2 wires connected to the entire scenic board track we have multiple connections for a belt and braces approach, basically on the ends of every line, under the bridge and under the other bridge at the other end, and they're using the pre-soldered 75 feed joiners, but there are no feed connections anywhere visible in the scene, which really helps with having to disguise wires on the board surface. Most of this layout is track work and ballast and platforms, and there's not a lot of building work required in terms of the scenery. The main structures on the layout are the two bridges at each end. This bridge here is the older style of bridge, which matches the brick style used on the retaining wall, and this is made using textured paper, which I believe is known in the industry as Greek paper or grease paper, and because that's where it's imported from, but it's textured brick. It's very, very good to work with. It's not self-adhesive, but it's glued on using the rocket car glue that I use to build the assembly. And this is just grey board, so I've been using grey board for many, many years now for all kinds of structures. It's fairly dense. It cuts quite cleanly with a sharp craft knife. It's about 2mm thick. It can be thicker, but 2mm, 2 or 3mm tends to be the best thickness to work with. And it has the advantage of being quite a concretey colour out of the box. So anywhere where I want to represent kind of pale stone or concrete slabs, I actually kind of leave the natural colour and just weather it slightly, because I find that looks pretty understated and pretty effective. The supports are made of columns of grey board, and the surface of the road is just painted foam board or foam core. And just a little bit of detailing. A sign, as you can see, and a couple of people stood waiting for trains or buses. And the Strathclyde orange livery bus that we found, which we think helps really pinpoint the location and the era as being 70s or 80s, just particularly 80s Glasgow. The only building on the layout is the kit built signal box, which is in a disused state now, because the idea being that the semaphores have been taken out and the colour lights have just been put in as the line has been truncated to the west, and all control has been put onto the signal box at the eastern end. So the Rennock West signal box is now closed, and to symbolise that, the stairs have been taken down or have fallen down, and there's a little bit of weed growing, a bit of grass growing out from down the side, and it's in a rather sort of drab state, and there's no sign on the signal box either. Another thing done in addition to the bus livery to pinpoint the location is a little bit of detail on the sign here. So there's a custom made sign in Illustrator, and I picked out a couple of road numbers local to the area, and I've got a sign there to Ayr and a sign to Polvery and Glenside, which I believe are made up, kind of contrived names made from a combination of other place names. Roughly it's a might have been Renfrew station, but because it's not based on anything specifically prototypical, it's named a little bit more vaguely than that. The back scene is a house backs or house texture found from a magazine, I believe, as a sort of add-on, and it's been photocopied and duplicated and edited in Photoshop to get some variation, and that just provides a very dull, flat, almost unnoticeable, unobtrusive back scene. The difficulty with back scenes is to not overdo them, or to do them poorly, or to try and introduce some kind of perspective that makes it really challenging when viewed at different angles. In a space that is small, a very vivid, very detailed back scene overpower the scene and be quite distracting. We're now looking at a blank space, and we're looking at blank space because I mentioned earlier the possibility of extending the layout. That is what we're going to plan to do to fill in the extra length that we have available in the room and provide a little bit of extra interest for the layout for the operators and for any other shows that we do with the layout. And that is to model the next section of the line up to where the buffer stops are on the truncated up and down former main lines that would have run west towards Bishopston, on the line towards Gowerk and Port Glasgow. But in this guise, the line is truncated and all services terminate at Rennock. But what I'm going to do is model the rest of what is effectively the up and down head shunts, the other side of the dual carriageway bridge here, and then also model the Rennock TMD, which is going to be a new build TMD, kind of, or refurbished TMD that's just been built at the end of the line. About enough for 2 locos in a fueling point and a single track maintenance shed of some description, and a little kind of office mess room beyond. About a metre long, about a metre of extension there, and that will provide an extra bit of scenic interest and an extra bit of operational interest for the second operator. The idea being that one operator can be making moves in and out of the fiddle yard, whilst another can be in charge of moves within the depot. However, it will be made sort of separately, and the layout will be self-sufficient in this format, because it does work, operationally very similar. One advantage of the extension is it will allow me to run round with double-headed trains. At the moment, the head shunt beyond the last point is just long enough for a Class 47. It's not long enough for any kind of combination of 2 locos, and I'm very interested in potentially buying a second Class 20 that will allow me to actually run around with a pair of 20s and things like that, or maybe store the odd wagon at the end of the siding. Just a little bit of flexibility there in terms of what can be run around in the station. The stock that's running on the layout is all proprietary, mainly new, some second-hand in terms of the rolling stock, in terms of the wagons, and of course, because this is DCC only, all the locos are fitted with DCC, most of them with sound. So I've got a pair of 25s, I've got a pair of 26s, I've got a pair of 37s, I've got a 20, 47, so building up quite a nice collection of BR Blue locos that could be seen in and around Glasgow, certainly all could have been seen in and around Scotland. And we're using a mixture of Zimo decoders and ESU decoders. The one downside of that is there is some variation in sound quality, or the kind of style and tonality of the sound. So my 2 26s sound different from each other, and my 2 Class 25s sound different from each other. So if I were to give any kind of advice that I would have so far using DCC, it would be to try and stick to using the same providers of sound file, the same models of speakers, and the same chips where possible, and kind of making a note and remembering which types of chips and sound packages and speakers you have in which locos, if you want them to be similar. You can speed match them using the NC system. You need to go on to programming track mode, and that allows you to read CV values. I won't demonstrate that now. There will be other videos demonstrating that, including ones that I watched to complete that, but that allows you to bring all your locos to a similar speed, and specifically with 2 locos of the same class, if you can speed match them pretty much exactly, that makes them very, very good for double heading, either using the consist system or by doing what I do and using both handsets, one per loco, and just controlling the speed identically so that they move together. That gives you independent control of the lights and the sound, and that's worked very well on the few occasions that I've tried it so far. So there we are, that's a brief look at Rennock Mk2, and a little bit of description of some of the features and some of the improvements that were made. As I said, the track is substantially better, and I'm a big fan of the bullhead rail profile for 00 to make it look a little bit more realistic. In fact, we do still get the odd 1 or 2 people that shows actually questioning whether the layout is EM or not. That's always nice. Most people can tell the difference between 00 and EM, but it's nice to know that a few people are questioning it, and that shows that there is a real difference visually between the standard flat bottom rail system and the Pico bullhead system that you can now use. As I said, DCC, fully DCC wired. Big fan of the Cobalt point motors. They work very, very well, and I believe there's a lifetime guarantee on those. Very easy to wire up, very slow, very gentle, particularly with the finer rail compared to solenoids that fire immediately. In the main, this board is pretty much complete, the layout's in a pretty much finished form. The other thing to mention is how different this layout is, that I didn't mention before, is the track plan slightly different from the previous Rennock. There will be some footage of old Rennock interspersed probably here to show you, but pretty much it was a copy-paste of the previous track plan. And it's the first time I've actually rebuilt a layout. I know some people do it quite a lot. There's sort of version 4, version 5 of layouts floating around. But I do think it's worthwhile, and I hope you enjoyed. Those of you that have seen some of the footage, some of the videos of the operating sessions or operating sequences, that it's quite a nice layout to operate and to watch, and it's a great way of just watching locos moving about. And it's a little bit of a difference between just modelling a terminus or just modelling a depot. Thank you.